Hello, my name is Jacob Nistler. Today I'll be giving a presentation on democratic alliances and a workshop that I conducted on the topic. First off, my hypothesis for this project was that democratic states form alliances with other democracies more frequently than with states that are non-democracies. Should be a pretty straightforward hypothesis considering the democratic peace theory and Kant's idea of perpetual peace, in which that democracies have never fought a war, at least a major war, that resulted in 1,000 or more battle deaths against each other. This just kind of takes it one step further and analyzes whether or not democracies have a proclivity to form alliances with one another, as opposed to just not fighting each other. So in this project, we looked at a Freedom House map of democracies around the world and determined whether or not democracies had alliances with one another. There were pairings of countries, and we took those countries and determined whether or not they were democracies, and then they were paired up, and we then selected whether or not they were both democracies or not. The trickiest part of this project, at least in my opinion, was determining what countries were and were not democracies. On the Freedom House map, the countries were coded either green, yellow, or purple. Green countries being free, purple being not free, and yellow being partly free. So for this project, green countries were automatically assumed to be democracies, purple countries were automatically assumed to be not democracies. The yellow countries were a little bit more difficult, and we're going to go over how I determined the yellow countries to be either democracies or not democracies. So my criteria was on the Freedom House scoring system that they had to have a 20 out of 40 in political rights and at least a 3 out of 4 in the subsection within political rights entitled election processes. So to start, India. India passed the political rights section with flying colors. I believe they had a 33 out of 40 on their section. The only reason that India was coded as yellow on the Freedom House map was because of more civil concerns, not political. So they were coded as a democracy for this project. Pakistan and Bangladesh I grouped together. They were both not democracies. They both had very, very low scores in the election process and the political rights as a whole. So those kind of helped shore up the South Asia portion of the project. The more tricky one was actually dealing with Eastern Europe. So for Albania, Albania was the easiest to determine of the yellow countries within Eastern Europe. They scored a 28 out of 40 on political rights and also had a 3 out of 4 on 3 different sections within the election category. So they were coded then as a democracy. Hungary was also coded as a democracy. They scored worse than Albania, but they still scored a 24 out of 40 on the political rights section, and they also had a 3 out of 4 within the electoral processes, which meets the criteria that I set for democracy. Serbia did not meet the criteria. They scored 20 out of 40 within the political rights section, but they did not have a 3 out of 4 within the election process. So they were coded as a non-democracy. So then I went through and looked at the pairings that were provided and determined whether or not both of the countries within that pairing were a democracy. And we were left with this table. So as you can see, allies were both democracies, 7 out of the 42. Not both democracies, but allies was 14. There was no pairing that was both democracies and not allies, which is honestly that's the most impressive block to me. There were no pairings that were both democracies that were also not allied, and that speaks volumes to me. The 7 that were both democracies and allies is important, but that 0 is almost more important to me. And then of course you see the not allies and not both democracies was exactly half of the pairings that we received. And so running a statistical analysis on the results of this, we got a chi-square value of 8.4 and a p-value then of 0.0033752221. And that p-value was lower than the critical value, and therefore we reject the null hypothesis that there is no correlation, there is no relation between these variables. So as we can see, that upholds the hypothesis of this project. and we can see that democracies do have some sort of proclivity to form alliances with other democracies. Thank you.